Hi, my name is Benedict. For myself, I'm in a green room, which means that this isn't the real stage because mostly this stuff's done for higher hertz. But Phase Plant, Kilohertz Phase Plant has a new oscillator, and it is granular, which means that rather than just playing a sample back, you can feed it a sample and it plays lots of fragments of it all over the place. I'm not a massive fan of granular as a general rule, like Reason's Grain's very, very cool synthesizer, and sometimes I get really good things out of it that work in a piece, but it's not my go-to. But it has its charms, and I quite like the way it's been implemented here. I did big review for higher hertz of Phase Plant and covered some other bits and pieces, and while I'm not crawly bumlicker about Kilohertz, I do think that outside of Reason they probably have the best, the most broadly capable and best presented overall system for creating a whole kind of a studio outside of Reason. It doesn't have the same sort of integration, but there's a lot about this that's really cool. So the addition of a granular oscillator is a big step forward and a big win for the KHS environment, particularly in this case, Phase Plant. It does require a sample to put in it, so this is an oscillator, not an effectinator. I know people are asking for this to be an effect, and while I could see potential charms for that, it is another ball of wax for coding, is my understanding. So we will find a sample, we whack it in, and then we do stuff to it. Here's one I prepared earlier. It's all manner of squeaky. These loops come from something else I also reviewed for higher hertz, the, I think, 150-year-old piano, the Ossa. Actually, a really cool, very nice kooky piano. Nice thing about Kilohertz is that we can actually preview everything in situ. These loops are all actually made out of manipulating the piano samples. There's something that comes with the piano pack, I think. Or you can just buy them on their own. They're kind of cool, they're amusing. I never use them for anything other than this, but amusing. Clean samples. Oh, these are also kind of weird things. So, I know a lot of people really like granular for its ability to just throw anything at it and it sort of makes weird noises. And as such, yep, that is a kind of a great thing. It's generally not the way I work, but it definitely has its charms, and in this situation, these provide these sounds provide a massive toolkit of bits and pieces. Windows does that. I don't know why it does that. We'll close that one down. Just some of my own samples. Some of them don't operate because they're too short. So obviously we can get some very nice sounds from these. Some of these were a bit loud, that's too short to do anything useful. One thing that would be nice is a little button that says, just play the sample, without doing the granular thing to it. So then you've got a clear A-B of, this is what I'm adding in this situation. It's not vital, but it's sort of... This is a very simple wavetable type thing. And another one of those. That one's too short. So if we look at, say, this one, we'll kill this off. We'll start again. So we add a granular. We find a sample. We're going to go with one of mine because I know what I'm doing with them. And, oops, too many clicks. Chime. Okay. Initially, when I very first opened this, I thought, Ooh, that's nasty. I don't know what to do with that, but it's got to make some basic decisions, and they are actually reasonable. So we've got our play head, and then how everything moves around it. Now, the decisions they've made make sense, but initially they're a little odd. They've got all of these features, which are the main oscillator features, sort of in a dominant position, and then in a smaller position they've got the granular ones. So if you look at these, you go, oh, this doesn't do anything, but you have to move here to get the granular ones. There are a couple of ways of going about things. This is the envelope shape of the grain, of each grain. This is the envelope shape for that. Obviously, this is the envelope shape for the synth sound itself. It's in a whole other module, not part of the grain, but it'll apply it for you. We can choose how many grains we have. This is interesting, and it's automatically defaulted, and it's actually wise. So it keeps the length of your... See how that's getting longer? Simply because the sample is playing faster. So this says, okay, we'll get the size of our grain oscillator, like it's the size in which it operates, to stay consistent across the keyboard. Most of the time you're going to want that on, sometimes you're not. So you can turn that off and you'll get a different scan of the sample as you move up and down the keyboard. You can set the root note, C4 being, well, C3 in any sane person's language, but they're obviously more Yamaha than I would like to be. There is an extra, we'll come back to the more basic ones, and I'm just going to move across these, of having these slices play back across a chord. And we can then set however many octaves we want that to play across. So if we pick 2 octaves, and this is my biggest beef with phase plant and on the whole system, is like a lot of this stuff's really tiny. It's fine if you're young and got eyes that work, not so good if you don't. So that's a very interesting way of actually expanding the tonal palette. So it's playing the bass note as well as notes across a range of fifths across 2 octaves. Interesting. So the chord thing is there, not for all the time, but sometimes that's going to add an awful lot without having to add another module to do that. So it's nice that it's there. Align phases. Initially I thought, oh, I don't really dig that. That just all sounds very kind of fractured and broken. Because if you're not careful, you can just have it playing this sort of little fragments of things. Whereas if you put align phases, it will give you a more consistent synth oscillator type sound. And then of course we can change the shape of our oscillator thing that's playing. The grain envelope, like so the total size of the grain, each grain can be set here. It can be set to greater than the length of the sample, which sometimes can create pops, whether there's going to be an intelligent system to say, that might be off the edge of the sample and might create pops, and solve that. In a future update, I wouldn't mind another little button to like depop. Assuming that can be done, I'm guessing it probably can be done because it's just math about knowing where you are in the sample and going, well, the sample would end there. We better hack a little bit off. So this will require a little bit of playing with, and then you can set the number of grains. How it works with the part of a number I haven't fully got my head around, but nonetheless, this is roughly how many grains we'll be playing at any given point in time. So 3 would say that at any given point in time, there should be 3 grains entirely present. Obviously, being able to reduce that means that we get somewhere near that number, but there's a little bit of activity around it as well. Use your ears as to what suits. We can work on a grain rate, a hertz rate, or a BPM sync rate, as in it works on a rigid BPM. Might be cool for drum loops, don't know, not my idea of fun. And then, of course, a hertz rate, which just says however many of these doohickeys per second till we get into the extremely large number, which is potentially taxing on a DSP. Hold on, let's have a look. Let's expand this a little bit more and get a little bit silly. It just kind of turns into an oscillator by the sounds of it. But if we had a longer sample, let's turn this down a little bit because this might be loud. Very loud. Actually, we'll pull this back here. So it's kind of interesting what we can do, although that doesn't seem to be moving. Nonetheless, that's a slightly silly number. Let's put that back to normal. So we can see all of our grains moving. They're really the fundamentals. Oh, and there's warm start. You see here it takes a little while for all of those grains to get going. Warm start means that they'll all automatically populate. So it's kind of baked what's going to happen and having it start already. Sometimes, for pad type sounds, that might be nice that you have the whole thing fade in. In other situations, if you want to be able to control your fade more here, then you're probably going to want a warm start. So between align phases and warm start, you will potentially get different sorts of results. So it's nice that they're all there. Then we will now look across these, which almost everyone's going to look at first. We can set randomness of position. So this means that the grains will start rather than at the core position, sort of anywhere between here and there is where they will appear. So yes, you will get a lot more unevenness depending upon what you've got. Bearing in mind this sample fades out, a lot of the samples are going to start further in. We can adjust the timing. Bearing in mind that the time of when it launches another grain is based upon the grain envelope size. So this is launching more grains faster. But we can actually move the timing of that so that it's more random. And if we're looking for that softer grain type sound where we're pulling, rather than just playing our sample straight ahead, that we're pulling from different places, then moving our timing out and our position out really changes things quite a lot. As you hear, some things are starting at the beginning, a lot of things are starting in the quiet end of time. We'll pull that back a little bit and that one back a little bit too. Obviously we can set it so that they all start at the beginning and so that each grain sounds hard. Which is how you get that kind of effect. And we might as well look at we add fifths or a minor. That's how that becomes cool and interesting. We can also set detuning. So let's put that back to having a fade in. This is how we get that cloud feel. So So it gives you that chorusy cloud kind of feel. We can change the level. So any individual grain can vary from at 100% nothing to fully loud dude. Makes our cloud sound softer or more organic. We can also change our panning randomly so they appear anywhere in the stereo left-right field. The animation looks cool. It's probably not necessary, but it does look cool, very in keeping with the kilohertz thing. We can then set our grains to go forward or backwards. If we set half of them, we get that feeling of it going around. If we set that back to a hard start, I don't know how this is going to sound for you. It might sound very loud. In the headphones, it's pretty aggressive. So we can turn that just really straight single synth chime into a big environment. Of course, we have then potential to add effects. There's a little bit of effect here, but we can add all kinds of fancy this, that, and the other to things. Make it sound too loud. Frequency shifting it. All the usual kinds of stuff that's doable within the environment. And the usual ability to modulate things. Now we can modulate anything. Let's look at modulating our position, because there's some more cool stuff we can do. This is a bit where I get really frustrated because everything's so tiny. Slow this down. In some ways it's not making a big difference, but let's reduce our grain size. So you can hear that as it's having to start later into the quieter part of the wave. For the moment, all our grain stuff is moving forward of the playhead. If we move it to backwards and forwards of the playhead, you can see that they're picking up around the playhead, which will make a difference. If we move to, say, this guy, and you can see it lighting up, giving us some sense of what's playing where. It's not space shuttle accurate, but it gives us a nice sense of, well, what's happening here. Remember this little button here? If we turn this off, now that's going outside of the sample, and I may have DC pops somewhere front or end of this. Not that I think I do, but because generally I trim so that they're on the zero crossing, but there can be little pops, but it's just the nature of the beast. You make shorter loops if that was the case in your grain envelope. Again, that just adds a really nice as we're moving around. If we don't want that one, we can say bye-bye, assign to just the usual. Let's assign to here, a little bit of drift. That's not a little bit of drift, that's an awful lot. So all the usual things that we can do, including being able to take something else and we'll take it from here and apply that to, I think phase is the one I want. We can now FM this. Let's give it an envelope. So we're actually doing Yamaha style FM, but rather than one sine wave to another, we're doing it against this grain, which is obviously going to be really very complex. Very nice. We might want to put some sort of chorusing on that. Where's my ensemble? Maybe that's a bit much. We'll just go with a normal chorus. I think just a tiny amount is probably enough in this case. And again, we can go, okay, what happens if I move to a different... And it would, again, be super to be able to just press a little button and go, okay, what if this was just a sample player instead of a grain? There is a sample playing thing, but just to be able to say, what have I added with the granification process? Because naturally, that is going to use more DSP than a straight sampler. And we could be achieving similar sorts of results with that ensemble. But it's a very nice addition. Really, really very, very cool. It's here. It was notable by its absence before. Adds a really nice warm sound to that sample. Okay, that's exceeding the actual range of the sample. Let's drag him back. Adds a nice kind of movement to that. One thing I'm not sure about, and obviously there's a logic, is that grain size and like envelope size and speed seem to be tied to each other completely. And I'm not sure how to separate them. I'm used to being able to separate them, to be able to say, okay, I want a grain this tiny, but I want them to be, maybe that's in the density or something, but that just seems to reduce the number of grains. What if I want a small grain size that is actually quite long? I guess maybe just by doing this kind of thing, but it's not the same. But nonetheless, it's a very nice oscillator that's very consistent with the whole kilohertz phase plant environment and add something that was kind of notably not there. So if you already have Faceplant, obviously get it, because it's free, is my understanding to anybody who has Faceplant. If you're sort of going, or I don't like, let's say you're not in Reason because you've got Grain, which is nice, a little different from this. But if you're sort of going, oh, okay, well, I'm on the fence about Faceplant or the KHS environment, then I think, as I said before, it's outside of Reason probably the single best mixing sound design environment. Yes, these don't look pretty. If you bring in a compressor, it doesn't immediately look like an 1176, but you know what? Why would you need it to look like an 1176? You've got peak, RMS, and fast. You can get in there and have it do all of those things anyway once you know how to do, well, your job. If you want saturation after it, well, I guess you just put a saturator in after it. It's not rocket science, really. We can decide where we want saturation. We can put that in here. Now what is it? I think it's just called distortion in here. There. There you go. 1176. There's no magic in here that's you're gaining by having some kind of system with pretty looking stuff. Yes, there's a certain coolth to them, and sometimes they can help you to focus. But nonetheless, once you know how it's achieved, you can do anything you want in this, and you're not tied to the limits of the 1176ism or the weird idea of an 1176 that somebody has made and just put 1176 on to fool you into thinking you're getting a proper thing. This setup is eminently very, very clever. And of course, you don't have to run it just in Faceplant. You can run each of these as an individual standalone VST. And these are all free, actually. All the snap-ins are free now. Or you can run it inside one of their put-together environments, which in effect land is Snap Heap or the Multipass, which splits it out into multi. I will be using an instance of Multipass to bring this up for post-production in DaVinci Resolve. I think that's it. That's our oscillator. Popping just because it's a little longer. So we pull that back, we've no longer got those pops from being outside of the universe. Add a little bit of growl. And that is really nice. It's more organic in a very synthy sort of a way than just your straight sample player. So I think it's great. Thank you very much, Kilohertz, and for being cool and adding that in. We're seeing a lot of new synth stuff come around. I mean, I guess it's time of year. Maybe it's time for NAMM or something or other. I know people talking about going to be at NAMM. But we've also got Reason's Object coming in, which I'm very eager to get my sticky mitts on. Won't be talking about it until I can actually get my sticky mitts on it. If you have any questions, ask them on down below. Thank you.